Hi, and welcome back to the Failing Upward Club. This is a space where we can reflect on the tough lessons of our biggest failures. You're joined by me, Danny Tyrrell, and my partner in crime here, Mike Bridgman. We're a couple of founders of a startup which met a very undesirable end. And at the end of the day, we thought the best way to deal with that from a general learnings perspective, but also just a general therapy perspective, was to start a little bit of content where we can go and dive deep into a few different topics related to the business, work out where we need to pick up the lessons, work out what we're going to take forward for next time. So Mike, welcome along to another installment. How are you going, mate? How are you feeling about failure after a few episodes of the acronym there in terms of just the Failing Upward Club? I do use a bit of profanity, so I think I can say the acronym if I wanted to.
Yeah, no, good. I'm feeling good. I must say I'm probably I'm starting to feel the itch, Danny, the itch to go again, to do something, to get creative. I just signed up for my vibe coding account today and Riplet. Yeah, gonna roll the shoulder over summer, but excited to see what might be around the corner.
I feel there's some exciting things around the corner, Mike. I don't think we're quite ready to be talking about those yet, but I do feel some excitement, and I think this builds into that excitement a little bit by thinking through what was DataCo, closing the book, I guess, on that whole experience. And today we're here to talk about technology. Technology is the theme for today. I think tech is the theme you're most excited about.
Yeah, obviously right in my wheelhouse. The biggest part of my contribution to the business was all things tech. So keen to dive into it, Danny. I'm here for the special commentary, all the in-depth knowledge. Fire it across. I'll respond to whatever you need me to.
Well, people don't know, probably outside our business, but you were responsible for pointing out the biggest failures of the tech. They used to call you Mike the Bomb Bridgman. You used to go in and just beat the shit out of the platform until it broke. Then the guys would work out where to fix it. So it was a very valuable contribution to the tech, Mike.
Yeah, I consistently did the thing that no human would think of doing to our technology. And sometimes that's what it takes. Obviously, with extremely capable and smart technical co-founders, there's a certain playbook that you'd apply. There's a certain logic that you learn when you do your PhD. And it takes someone that has no idea to just get in and do all the wrong things. That's ultimately why the solution pretty much worked every time, because we tested it. We tested it with all the unconventional stuff and the conventional stuff. And yeah, thank you for that, recognizing that, Danny, is the most important technical contribution of the business that was.
It was. Were you talking about vibe coding? I don't even know we need to talk to our old tech co-founders anymore.
Exactly.
But it's probably worth giving them a bit of a shout out to Keshav Murthy and James Pedersen as well. Like, we didn't bring them on the show for this particular episode, so that's a good caveat to say we're not going to go into the meat and potatoes. Boom! Look at that. Another episode, another meat and potatoes reference of the tech stack. There's a lot of lessons I'm sure those guys would have from a detailed technical perspective, but we wanted to talk a little bit more broadly as the business and some of the high-level lessons of the tech, both as people who were quite involved in what we were designing and building, but also what clients were talking about from the technology. And I think that's where a lot of our lessons today will be focused on. Maybe we'll do a follow-up episode where we bring at least one of those guys on the show. I think it'd be struggling to get James on, but Big K, I'm sure we could get to do a little cheeky guest appearance at some point. But before we get too far off track, maybe let's just start with a few of the highlights. So these are some of the key themes to start the conversation, and we'll let it roll from there. But I think right at the top, and this kind of takes us all the way back to the start of our journey, really. But I think one of the key learnings was that most clients don't actually want bleeding edge tech. They don't want something which is so far kind of pressing the boundaries that they can't understand it, because if they don't understand it, they don't trust it, and they can't deploy it inside their organization with a whole lot of effort. So I think the first learning we can kind of talk through a little bit from our experience was around them not wanting bleeding edge tech. The second one really was it takes a hell of a lot of effort and complexity and time to build something very simple. But it is crucially important to do that to get to that point. It's very easy to say, let's keep it simple on our end and we'll push complexity to an end user. But I think that ultimately isn't the right path. And I think some of the things we learned really around that effort to simplicity is always worth it. The third one is really the classic startup kind of lesson, which is just we built too much. We built way too much. We built too many things that clients didn't use. And the reality is, if you're working with just a small handful of clients in the early days, then you're going to build way too much. So I think having the confidence to kind of challenge what you need, and there's a few things we can probably dive into on that topic about how much do you build and how much is too much. And then finally, this probably goes on the simplicity theme, but a great user experience is everything. And user experience means a whole lot of different things depending on who your user is. And I think this is a space which is going to keep progressing very fast with what's going on with AI at the moment. So I think some different lessons there, Mike. Maybe I'll put it on you. Where do you want to start? Where would you like to dive into some of the more meatier details on?
I think we should start with the first one, Danny. Let's start at the top. Let's not get too unconventional. And that was just to remind you that most clients don't actually want bleeding edge tech. They really ultimately want something they can understand, trust, and deploy without blowing up their internal processes. So I think the quick background that maybe sets the scene would be helpful here as well, and probably some of our learnings that ultimately landed us on the initial infrastructure and approach of our solution.
Yeah, so maybe quick rewind. We started this business really kind of thinking about what a solution would need to look like for a specific client. And what that meant was we weren't starting the process saying, here's what we're going to build, here's what we're going to do. We actually started by saying, here's a problem we're trying to solve, here's a capability we're trying to build, and how best should we do this? And that largely was about going and doing the classic kind of expression of interest, go and see different solutions in market, work out how we could solve this approach and what it would need to look like. And that uncovered a range of different possibilities and showed us a whole lot of different things which were changing in the field we were thinking about, which is really a concept called privacy enhancing technologies. And without, again, going too technical, the whole concept of privacy enhancing technologies is about how you do more in a protected or encrypted space to protect the underlying data as much as possible, but still providing utility from the outputs or from the operations that you're doing. So we went super deep into a range of concepts, from differential privacy to secure multi-party computation to homomorphic encryption, the type of words that you just start spitting out in front of people and they get kind of eyes start spinning straight away. It sounds sexy, it sounds cool, it sounds sophisticated. And largely they were awesome from an intellectual perspective. But the truth is, when we went to go and implement those solutions or think about testing those solutions, it just led to more complexity. The complexity of the encryption was fantastic, but it meant that people didn't understand them, you couldn't verify them. Even something like SMPC, when we went to stand it up, the concept is that no data moves in an unprotected form out of your organization, and you stand up a node and you kind of data comes in and out computing from that node. But the reality was that just made the InfoSec guys absolutely shit scared, because they were like, I don't know what's coming in and out. I can't verify this mathematics behind what's going in, what's not going in, and I have to sign my life on saying that I am okay with this. So I think the real lesson that we learnt very early on was around it doesn't always have to be that complex, and actually finding an approach which blends the best of the kind of concepts with traditional concepts which are tried and tested and true for reasons is a very pragmatic way to think about building something. And I think a lot of the time people getting these very kind of academic technical builds, and that's why you see so many things coming out of academia that never make it off the ground, because they never get to that practical reality of what it takes to actually deploy it or make it come to life in the reality.
Well said. And I was just trying to sort of figure out how to encapsulate maybe where we landed through that process, and using some common startup vernacular, but it's almost like the minimum viable like security feature is what we ended up building. So to your point, some of the more bleeding edge capabilities in encryptions, which, you know, just to kind of contextualize, are maybe being deployed in some sort of advanced you know, global defense settings or in space applications. So we're talking like absolutely have applications, but requires some very, very smart people that are ultimately more invested in the protection than they are the complexity side of things, and will overcome all of those internal challenges around sign off to get something done. But in our approach, it was really, all right, how do you kind of strip back and use the approved and comfortable patterns of data transfer inside and outside of an organization, but really then hone in on the key challenge. And fundamentally for our solution, or our style of solution, that was around not wanting to ship or divulge, expose PI or personal information from one organization to another. So the kind of first principles of, okay, how do you then protect that information, and just that information almost, in a really seamless, simple way, so that things are easy to understand from an organizational perspective. There is a small part of complexity that needs to be solved, but it's very directly linked to the key friction point which has prevented this activity before, and kind of nothing more, I think, is ultimately where we landed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the way we had to then get that over the line and convince people about that was to also make that a very simple thing to understand and to adapt. And this is where that second point that I was talking to comes in, where there was so much time and effort and even internal debate that we had with our core engineering team around who wears the complexity. It's like, is the complexity something that we're going to put our hand up and say, we will absorb that, build that into what we do. We know it's making it harder for us to maintain what we do and to build what we do, but if we can make it simple for the end user, then they will get more value out of it. And even the approach you said around protecting PI, we ended up, one of the most powerful features of our entire proposition was literally something which was a demonstration tool. So the approach we had to protect data before it came to our platform, we used to demonstrate. I don't even know if you remember this, Mike. We used to demonstrate it with a Jupyter notebook, and we had these little code snippets, and we'd click some buttons and we'd go down this Jupyter notebook, like away from our core app experience, and show them how the container was running and some things, and show them some outputs. And it was like, again, this was when we were still in this really like tech heavy sell as well. But we just got to the point where like, this is too fucking hard for us to run.
Too hard for me to run.
Yeah, I was going to say something about you and Jupyter notebooks, but I'm gonna.
I know. Just cut you off, Danny, before you're too mean.
It was effort for me to do even as well, to be honest. If I don't go and code in anything for a while, it takes a little while to go and get it running, and you got to set up. There was too much we needed to do, and eventually, I have no idea who came up with the idea and how it came to life. But eventually, it was like, oh, why don't we just do it as a browser-based widget that's just in the app experience? You guys can just demo it through there. No big organizations will use it, but at least maybe some smaller organizations who don't have technical teams might be able to get some benefit out of it, and we'll at least be able to demonstrate in a more streamlined fashion. And before we knew it, there was like one client put 15 million records through the browser-based tool. And it was like the security was all still 100% there, the protection, there was like a different way they had to access data, it was all run locally on a laptop, but they got all of the protections from the approach, but it was just a far, far simpler way of doing it. And it meant that advertisers, particularly with our publisher partners, didn't have to go through these complex security implementations or technical implementations to get things up and running or to get access to the data science resource. And so, like, turning that thing that was very complex into something which is simple was, like, paid off massively. And the conversations we had for a long time most of our guys for certain features would say, why are we doing this? Why don't we just let them do it? Let's just give them, because they saw users in their own eyes, and that wasn't wrong, because we did have users who looked something like them. But we also had just a ton of users who we were really trying to target with the proposition, who were way less technical, who we didn't want to have to work out how to install Docker and run a container on their laptop or wherever it needed to be. And so I think that kind of relentless focus on simplicity is huge. It's a massive thing that, like, I think we learnt it and we had to focus on it, but I always think that we could have made things simpler.
Yeah, and I think the key learning there, from my perspective, is that complexity on the client side equals cost, ultimately. So you made the point, Danny, like where we got to was that the solution could be accessed, could be utilized by an end client without any deployment or any implementation effort on the client side. And all of that effort ultimately just results in time and money. So that was an enormous unfair advantage for us. But yeah, if I can put my non-technical spin on it, the learning is wherever you can simplify and remove that complexity and that friction from the process is just going to accelerate the onboarding flow, accelerate the deals holistically. But then when you're getting into the equation of, what the total cost of ownerships are, our sticker price for many clients was the total price, as opposed to the sticker price plus half a dozen engineering resources and 6 months to deploy, as some of our competitors had.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think that kind of mentality and thinking is what you need to do to make something simple enough, and putting yourself in the client's shoes. As he said, we always think about solutions and what we're selling as vendors, not as what the client's really going through. And sometimes you're like, oh, but it's so simple and it's so cheap. And at the end of the day, it's like, well, do you know what's not cheap? Me having to go and line up those engineers, or to go through the governance forums, or to do this and this and this and this. And it's always the missing part that we forget about a lot of time, I think, on vendor side. And yeah, I think always having that focus on simplicity is very important. Now, I will caveat that with the lead into our next kind of theme that we were talking about, though, which is, though, if you don't have a really clear view of what the clients really need, and you're trying to make everything simple, like, you'll get to the point where I think what we did is we largely built too much. It's fair to say we built too much. And there was lots of things now, like our platform was a fully fledged bells and whistles to a lot of different aspects in terms of functionality and what you could do. And it was very flexible. We designed it in a way which meant that you could take the pieces you wanted to use for collaboration. We were trying to abstract as much of the complexity as we could in a lot of different areas. But it also meant that we just built things that weren't necessarily required, or they weren't required yet. And I think there's got a lot of parallels with our sales, the sales conversation we had a couple of weeks ago, which was about how you need to sell something before it's there. And that's kind of a
very memorable conversation.
It was, Mike. It really much was. But it was the concept that you can sell something before it's there is also important from a simplifying what you build perspective, because otherwise you build something again with the vision of this is what they need or this is what they want. And this is definitely one I sit there at night thinking about, but it's like, could we have built less? What things do we not need to build? And there's a few things where, like, we literally had functionality in our platform, which we knew was incredibly valuable, and we were committed about use cases, and it come up multiple times of use cases in conversations and requests from clients, and they demonstrated well, and it showed a really good breadth, but nobody was like really using it to the extent that we knew in their like production settings. But by the end, in the last few months, there was like use cases coming through the door, which were starting to bang on functionality that had been there and tested and ready to go for so long, but we were just waiting for the market use cases to be there. And those are the ones which are hard, because it's the same kind of have a vision about what people need, but do you if you build it too early and you can show them and you can demonstrate it versus saying, all right, this is what we're going to do. It's a very, very fine, it's a fine line.
The question then for you, if you put dust that CPO hat off that you've got next to your desk there, we'll have to change the logo on that one at a point in time. But strategically then, what do you do? Because one of the practical realities of where we were at was that we had capability or resource that wasn't fully deployed because we didn't have the kind of client pipeline at a point in time. So how actually would you have done, what would you have done differently? Like, you've got 2 to 4 resources depending on when the time frame was that are sitting there. Do you tell them not to build anything? Do you tell them to go and do something else? Like, how do you use it? Because that feels like a massive waste and just you're burning capital with no output.
Yeah, I think it depends on a few things. And I think the path we had previously, we knew we had an anchor client, we knew we had use cases and ecosystem to build. So there were certain things we knew were just no regrets activities to build. And I think you've got to have enough conviction. You want to build enough to demonstrate that there is, like, demonstrate what you want to do is possible. I think the whole vaporware approach, like, sure, go and sell what it is first, but there's a certain stage of getting to this, like, true concept of an MVP, something that looks there that's going to be ready to go, and then having something you can demonstrate at least to that first degree. But I think it's more, once you're out of that core is what you need to build after that. And there's always things you can build from a foundational perspective, which are no regrets, like things like user management and like some of the general security and some of the integration part. Like, there's just certain things in there which take time to build. But I think one of the lessons from our approach is there was a lot to the story of the technology and to the approach of the technology to have gone through the hard yards of making this compliant platform from day one. Like, that earned us a lot of trust, knowing that we'd had to go through the efforts to get it there. And I think there's this minimum viable security and compliance, nearly to the concept you were talking about before, which you just need to bring along. So I think it's more about a commitment to vision in terms of what are the no regrets things to build. And then once you've got enough, it is a bit of that kind of fine line between, like, how do you push something into R&D and say, all right, this is where we put the efforts to build, or at least to demonstrate or to prototype or to go and do, but we'll only do it to the first level. We're not going to go the whole hog here and do everything we need to do. And generally over the time, like, we kept our engineering team incredibly lean the entire duration of our business. And that is one area, and our tech co-founders were incredibly good at saying, nah, we don't want any other people. Don't give us any other people. We want to keep this lean. We want to keep it into a tight group, because until we get to the point where we're like, fuck, we can't handle this effort, then we'll go and work out who we need to expand to. And most of the time, there was a while where they were pumping out features, but there was times where they could go and focus on some of the hardening things and some things not to waste the time. But the reality is, if you don't have that client uptake, it gets hard to justify what you've built. And again, it's like a consistent message for our business. It's like we came very close to justifying a heap of the different functionality and things that we'd shown for a long time, sometimes which was also just feature parity with competitors. But there's certain things like that were in our platform that were never saw the light of day in production, never were used once in prod.
I'll refrain from sharing that thought, Danny, for another time. Moving on.
There's a special side podcast or side episode, right? Like the contained thoughts.
It's my
That's
diary.
all right, I love it. It builds a suspense.
No, it's just gonna. It's all right, mate. The last one then around that you shared was around like the user experience and how impactful a great user experience is, but also keen to get your thoughts on, with the increasing use of AI and the capability around AI, like how we think about that evolving into the near future.
Yeah. So again, in the early days of our business, I think we For a little while, we struggled with defining who our user was, and there was nearly a little bit of debate in terms of who the end user was. And this touches on what I was talking about before. Was it going to be a technical data scientist or data engineer who was just felt comfortable in the code and they didn't want to see any UI and they weren't doing any click ops or anything like that? Or was it a marketer who maybe has a little bit of like analytics and tech experience, have used a bunch of platforms, but they're not going to write SQL? And I think finding who that was critical to working out the right experience for them and being able to then simplify the experience for them. And we hedged our bets a little bit, and we had a hat in both camps. And you can do that these days with like having an SDK and being able to just give that to a technical user and hit the APIs. But I do think that the ability for more and more non-technical folk to use technology is just like, the barriers to entry for tech are so low now. Like you just spoke about getting starting something to think about vibe coding. I was talking to one of the X1835i designers who actually did some of the early design work with us right at the start of DataCo, who has been off doing his own thing for a while, but he's fully built a product just using Airtable and Looker, and he's just been able to like essentially just work it out himself because he's got his Gemini or his Claude or his Jeep sitting there to the side, and he's able to ask it the questions and work out what you need to do. And you've got these other platforms which are essentially no-code platforms to help to build an app, or you can literally get a full execution environment set up and get all the code and run something like end-to-end with proper vibe coding as well. So like the barrier to entry to technology is just getting lower and lower. And so people's applications and their experiences and what they need to do also probably need to follow that path. But it also opens up the whole question around maybe your experience is just for an agent to pick up. Like maybe you're just crafting whatever you need to do to make it easier for another agent or an LLM to ingest and do something with and then move on. Like maybe it's not even a human who's going to be clicking buttons on your app anymore. So I think this user experience space, like what's happening at that real top end of the stack is moving really quickly and is a really fascinating area, but it's still going to be the battleground. And even if your end user is going to be an LLM, you have to make sure it's as easy as possible for an LLM to use and has the context and whatnot. So I think experience we learned was, at the end of the day, the most important thing about user experience is just knowing who the right user is. Yeah.
Well, and funnily enough, I think by the time we finished everything up, right, we actually did have both types of users. Probably the one persona we didn't have was like a data science end user, but we absolutely had engineering teams running implementation via, API-enabled platform using the SDK, like Tick, and then a lot of the end users were just the simple ClickOps folks. By pure volume and quantity, we had more ClickOps non-technical users accessing the platform and the capability purely through a UI, but then you've got your larger paying customers that obviously want to implement directly into infrastructure and automate a few of these things. So that's where the kind of the SDK becomes incredibly helpful, right? So yeah, look, at the end of the day, I think the bet wasn't wrong. And as the use cases evolved into some of the stuff that was on the horizon, potentially we did even start to see the data scientists come onto the platform.
Yeah, the one thing I will say in this AI LLM kind of world that we now live in is the answer isn't just, oh, you just make it a chat interface and it does whatever you want. Like that whole kind of line of thinking is total bullshit in my mind, because the repeatability in the structure becomes very difficult. I strongly believe the next generation of UI that we're going to is this kind of hybrid approach that has some level of structure to it, and maybe that structure can evolve and you can tailor that structure yourself. Maybe that's something we haven't seen before, but you need to at least have a concept of a fixed structure, and then you need to have your assistants and that's someone who's interpreting or someone who's orchestrating or running things and that whole thing as well. Maybe I'm asking a question which can reference all of the structure and everything that's there, and that chat style interface is together with it. But you need some repeatable structure, otherwise it's really hard. It's like you go into any of your accounts that you have, and you got like a ton of accounts. I was like, fuck, did I ask that to Gemini? Did I ask that to Jeeps? Is it my Claude? And then you go into there and you've got these like buckets and folders and conversations, and you ask something that was ages ago. Like it can be confusing, to be perfectly honest. And so having some kind of fixed way of thinking and navigating, and this is where that whole logical and conceptual architecture and how you structure things becomes really important, and helping a user to either know what is a good way to logically structure something or help them tweak the structure if it's not right for them that's where I think a lot of this interface kind of world is going to go in the next little while. Who knows where we get further down the line, but at least for the next few years, I think that hybrid approach is going to have a lot of weight.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the big thing is people don't know what they don't know, right? So even an ability from an experience perspective to almost kind of containerize a location in software, if you will, that, hey, you come to this page to get to this type of outcome, and you go to that spot to get to another type of outcome, and here's kind of a few steps that get you to that outcome. Because, I think that the complete open-endedness is not practical if you're selling a solution into a large enterprise, right? For all the reasons that they want to know, they want to guarantee the outcome, they want to know the process, it has to be repeatable, teams internally have to be trained on it. So it's almost like bringing it back, and we've spoken about this around the simplicity of the solution, but also a single point solution versus the monolith that can do everything. And all that learning would seem that it needs to be applied to AI as well.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I think that's the thoughts of how you simplify it for the end user absolutely hold true. It's just simplifying it for an end user might just be to help them know what questions to ask. Because as you said, just having an interface and you say, it's easy, you've got all this data and you just ask it a question and it'll do what you want. It's like, what's the first thing they ask? Like, what question should I ask? It's like, what? Yeah.
And it's funny, right? Because that's just like human nature. It's like, why are experienced people so much more valuable? Because they know the right questions to ask. They've seen it. Like, all that built up knowledge means I can come to a meeting, I can ask one question, I'm going to get to a really good answer or uncover some information I need to know. Like that doesn't go away. People don't become just infinitely more have infinitely more wisdom because now they've got access to an AI.
Yeah, exactly. And I think now where we're getting to in terms of where people can build companies is being like vendors and individuals and founders are becoming curators, really. It's like, here's a suite of different capabilities that you can do. And it's now the barrier to entry to go and to build an app and to do all the coding and to do all of those things just flying at the moment. And so to curate an idea space and to curate a problem space and say, here are things that I know cause problems in your life, and here are different things that we need to do to bring that together and deliver that to someone. And I'm just going through the effort to assemble that. And maybe that means that the costs are lower for certain people because I don't have to hire 20 engineers to build it now. There's certain costs I have on these other platforms, but I don't need to go and get 1,000 people to build a business now. So yeah, it's a very, very interesting time that we're living in. And you know what? I feel it's a great time. It's a great time to build a business.
It'd be great to have a bit of time on your hands, I reckon, right now.
Imagine if you had time on your hands and you just built a business, and you had a heap of great ideas and some good networks. What would you do, Mike? What would you do?
I don't know, Danny. Maybe that's a topic for another day.
Well, we'll surely find that day, Mike. We'll surely find that day. But for those listening in, thanks for listening. Hopefully you've been enjoying these conversations as much as we had. As we said, we could be just talking to my auntie Heather and Mike's mum at this point in time. We don't really know. The key thing here was we were doing this for our own good, to try to reflect and to learn and to see what we needed to do in the future. But the concept here is to expand that for other people who are interested. So follow along in the content, contribute to the content, add comments. And if you're ever interested in coming and sharing your thoughts on where did you have a failure, especially anyone who started a business and who has started a business that fails, please, would love to have you on for a conversation. We've got a few exciting guests already in the works, who we'll let you know when they've been fully recorded and we can share their stories as well. But for now, thanks for listening, and keep advancing is the things that we say. Nothing zero, Mike. Nothing zero.
See you later.